Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can take your own measurements and create your own basic block for a skirt pattern. If you've never done pattern drafting before, this is the one to start with. Not only can you create a basic skirt, but you can hold on to that block and use it to create other styles of skirts. So let's go ahead and get started. These are the supplies that I recommend that you get in order to start your drafting. First thing is going to be pattern paper, or you can use just big sheets of paper if that's all you can find. I have tracing paper for creating my pattern pieces from my blocks. You can also use tissue paper. The hip curve ruler, this is this curvy ruler. It's going to help us with the curvy sections of drafting. I also have a straight ruler. Yours doesn't have to be clear plastic, but it does come in handy. Sewing gauge. We also have tape measure. This is for taking our measurements. Tape to tape our paper down, scissors to cut our paper out. Then a pencil with an eraser. If you don't have an eraser on your pencil, get one separately. Tracing wheel, and then this is to keep us organized with our measurements. So this download we're going to make available if you need it. Taking accurate measurements are essential when drafting your own patterns. You don't want to wear bulky clothing. You want to make sure that you wear something tight, like in this case the mannequin is wearing a tight tank top. If you can, have a friend help you take measurements so you're not bending over. You want to make sure that you record your numbers perfectly and you're not rounding. If it's 13 1/4, you don't round down to 13 just to make it easier for you to do your math. You want to make sure those numbers are correct so then your patterns come out correct and you have a better fitting skirt. Also, what I like to recommend is that you put strings in the essential areas that we're going to be measuring. The first one is going to be the waist. This is your natural waistline, and I do a string because then I'm taking half measurements, and I'm taking a measurement of the front of the waistline, and I'm taking a measurement of the back of the waistline, and I'm making sure when I do both those measurements, I'm measuring at the same point of my body. So for the natural waistline, it's above your belly button. It's where you have your indentation. If you were to bend your body to the side, you're going to have a crease right at the natural waistline. The next is going to be the hip line area, which I have indicated with my green string here. This is going to be the fullest part of your hip line, and you want to make sure that your string is going evenly across the whole body. It's not being slanted or crooked. It's going over the fullest part of the hips and the fullest part of your behind. All right, let's go ahead and start taking some measurements. For this, I'm going to use my flexible tape measure, and we're going to start with the front waist. For starting our measurement, you're going to start at the side seam area. So if you're wearing a shirt that has a side seam, it really makes it helpful. So I'm going from side seam across the front to the side seam on this other side. You're going to write down the measurement for your front waist. Since we're looking at the front, let's go ahead and do the front hip as well. Same thing, starting at the side seam, going across the front, ending at the side seam at the hip. Once we have our front measurements, we're then going to turn around because now we're going to do the same thing, but we're doing it in the back. So side seam across the back to the side seam on the other side. For back waist, for back hip, side seam across the fullest part of our hips to the side seam on the other side. Hip depth is going to be the distance between your natural waistline and the fullest part of your hip. Now I'm looking at the side of my body, not the front or the back, just the side. So I'm going to take my tape measure, put it at my waistline, and then mark it at my hip line. Now normal range is going to be between 7 and 10 inches. Length is the last measurement we need to get. This is going to be the skirt length, or how long you want your skirt to be. You're going to start at the waistline, and then you're just going to put the tape measure down to however long you want your skirt to be. All right, now that we have our measurements, let's go ahead and start drafting. So we're going to start with the skirt front. I have my paper laid out, everything's taped down. I'm going to go ahead and grab my straight ruler to start off with. Now I said to use a pencil. I'm going to go ahead and use a pen just so it's a little bit easier for you to see. But I'll start with dash lines, and when they become more permanent lines, then I'll go ahead and make that a solid line. So the first thing is I'm going to start at the bottom corner of my paper, and I'm just going to do a straight line, and this is going to start off as our hemline. So it doesn't matter what length it is, just go ahead and draw a straight long line. And I'll make this a dash line. All right, there's our first line. I'm going to go ahead, mark this hemline, just so we know what we're dealing with here. From the end of the hemline over on this side, you're then going to draw a line that's going to be perpendicular to that. So it's going to be a squared line. And for this one, it's actually going to be a certain length. So this is the bottom, and this is going up the skirt. So this length is going to be the length that you want your skirt to be. So I want mine to be 14 inches. So this line is going to be 14 inches in length. So go ahead, make sure it's straight. You always want to make sure, take your time, that everything is straight. All right, this line is now going to be considered our center front line. So I'm just going to put CF for center front. Now we're going to plot out our hip line. So if this indicates the top of the skirt, which is our waistline, our hip depth is the distance between the hip line and the waistline. So starting here, you're going to measure down whatever your hip depth is, and mine is 8 inches. So for now, just put a little mark. Then we're going to do a little bit of math because we need to determine how long our hip line is going to be. So for that, we're going to be dealing with our front hips measurement. Let me just grab a clean piece of paper as we do a little bit of math. You're going to start off with your measurement. So go ahead and write that down. 17.5 for me. Plus 1 inch. This is for ease. Because this pattern is meant for woven fabrics and they're not stretchy, you need to add a little bit of extra fabric or add a little bit extra into your pattern, so then you have enough fabric for movement and for it to feel comfortable and you're able to bend over and stuff. So this is going to be 18.5 inches for my measurements. Now we're only plotting half of the front pattern. This side is going to be placed on the fold of the fabric. So this is for the full length of the front. So I'm actually going to divide this in half because again, we're only doing half of the pattern. So that's going to give me 9.25 inches. So this is going to be the length of our hip line, 9.25 for me. So I'm starting at this mark I made where the hip line is, and then I'm going to draw a line that's 9.25 inches. On your hemline, you're going to put a mark for the same length of what your hip line was. So mine was 9.25 inches long. So I'm going to start here, measure out 9.25, and then make another mark. About right here. And then I'm going to connect this mark with the end of my hip line and draw it up until I get to my 14 inches again. So it's the same length as our center front line. So we're going to make sure everything is lined up here. Okay, so right about here, do my dash line. Now this line is going to be our side seam area. So I'm just going to put SS. From the top of this to the top of this, go ahead and connect it with another dash line. And just for now, this is going to be designated our waistline. Next, we're going to concentrate on the hip curve, and that's going to give our skirt a little bit of shape. From the hip line, you're going to measure up on the side seam line 2 inches, and you're going to make a mark. This is for everybody, so everybody does 2 inches. And just mark it very lightly. Then up here at the top on the side seam and the waistline, you're going to measure 3/8 of an inch. Again, this is for everybody. And you're going to draw a line. You may have to draw a little bit longer because we're going to connect it with another line. All right, now from the side seam, you're going to measure over 3/4 of an inch. So you do a line that's 3/8 of an inch, and then you go over 3/4 of an inch. It's about right here. So you see this line here, I have to draw a little bit longer because I want these two lines to intersect. Right there. So that's perfect. We're going to connect this mark that we made at the 2 inches and where these plot points meet in order to create our hip curve, and we're going to be using the hip curve ruler. Now this part is a little tricky because people are not always curvy in the same way. So you kind of have to decide how curvy you are. Now with the hip curve ruler, the smaller down I go, the flatter it's going to be. So if you're more curvy, you need to go with a higher number, and you just kind of have to play with it. So that's why it's always a good idea to do a muslin to test out your pattern, and that way you can adjust it if you need to. So I'm going to start with it. So I'm starting here at this point, and I'm trying to draw a line to this point here. And I'm paying attention to where my measurement is in my ruler. So you can see it's at a 16. Maybe I'll just put a little pencil mark right here so I remember, because I want to do the same exact measurement, or at least point, when I do my back. This is for my front. I want my back to be the same curviness. So everything ends up working out. So I'm just going to go ahead and start plotting this in. And you want this line to kind of blend in to the straight edge. So if you end up having an angle here, just kind of smooth it out. You can just roughly do it with a pencil to kind of make the lines flow into each other. Let's go ahead and shape our waistline. So on the waistline, you're going to measure over from the center front line 3 inches, which I've already done, and make a mark. Again, this is for everybody. Everybody does 3 inches. Now we're going to connect this point to the top of the hip curve. And to do that, we're going to use our hip curve ruler once again. And instead of using this curvy side, we're going to actually use the inside curve, and you want it to be a little bit straighter. You don't want it to be too curvy. And again, if you need to, go ahead and blend this together. So we have a straight edge that slowly becomes more curvy as it goes up. Chances are that this waistline is bigger than what your front waistline is if we were to divide this number in half. So now we need to decide how big we need to make our darts in order to whittle this down so it actually fits with our measurement. You're going to take your front waist measurement, and we're going to add 3/4 of an inch. This is for ease. Again, we want to make sure it's going to be comfortable for us to wear. You're going to divide this number in half, and whatever that measurement is, that's going to be the waist size. Now again, we're dividing in half because we're only doing half of the front. So for me, this is 7 7/8. Then take your flexible tape measure, and you're going to measure the waistline of your block, because we're actually going to write this number down and then find the difference between the way the waistline is now, and you're only starting here at the top of the hip curve, not over here. So from here to here, measurement, write the number down, and then find the difference between this number and this number. I found my waist measurement. Here is the 8 5/8, that's what it is. Took the difference from my original one, and this is the difference, 3/4 of an inch. So what this is telling me is that I need to add a dart or darts that are equal 3/4 of an inch in order to end up with 7 7/8. That's what darts are for. They're to like whittle down the waist area, but they also give you shape. Now you can do 1 dart or you can do 2 darts. If you have a big measurement, such as there's a 2-inch difference here, then you can have 2 darts and make each dart 1 inch big. It makes it a little bit easier than instead of just doing one huge dart. Or if you have a small number, you can just do 1 dart. I'm going to actually pretend like I need to do 2 darts just so I can show you what this is going to look like. So you take whatever this is and you divide it in half. Again, you're only doing this if you're doing 2 darts. So this gets divided in half. So that means each dart needs to be 3/8. Because if I do one dart that's 3/8 and another dart that's 3/8, both of them together add up to 3/4 of an inch. So now we're going to get started in creating our darts. Where you made this original mark here, when you measured over 3 inches, this is where the first dart is going to start out. So I'm going to number this number 1, just to make things a little bit easier. I'm going to take my dart measurement, 3/8 of an inch, and I'm going to make another mark. So there's one dart. I'm going to put that as number 2. Then I need to have a little bit of a space in between the darts. I can't put them right next to each other. So the space between them is about 1¼ inches. So this is going to be the start of my next dart. So we'll say 3. So here's one right here, and now I'm going to do another set right here. It's going to be the same size as this. So 3/8 away from number 3. And I'm going to mark that as number 4. So this is going to be 1, and this is going to be another one. Next, you're going to draw a line down the center of each dart that's 3½ inches in length. So you're starting at the hip curve area, and you're just drawing it straight down, and you're going to just square off a little line at the end of it. At the very end of your dart, you're going to connect each side of it. So 1 to here, 2 to here, and then 3 to here, and 4 to here. So that's going to create the look of your darts. You always want to try to shape the top of your darts, and I'm going to show you why. So here's my dart that I'm going to shape. I'm going to pinch it right down in the middle, so I'm basically folding the dart in half. I'm going to take this folded edge and I'm going to press it down in the direction of my center front, which is over here. And if you want, you can tape it down if it's a little bit easier. Mine's very subtle. It's very hard to see the line, but here is my waistline right here on this side of the fold. And then when I get down here, it dropped just a little bit, so the lines are not connecting. One here, one here. So we're going to try to fix that. Mine's just very subtle, but some of them can be pretty bad because when you sew your dart together, it's going to end up with this jagged, uneven, and we want it to be nice and smooth. I'm going to go ahead and grab a pencil. I'm going to start at the one that's on top. And on this side of the paper with my pencil, I'm just going to blend a line so it's nice and smooth, like this. And then grab a piece of cardboard, place it underneath. You still want to hold it. Tracing wheel is next, and you're going to rub right on that line going through it. And if you don't have a tracing wheel, you can just use, I actually have some right here, some straight pins, and you can just poke through the paper with your straight pin. So when I open it up, I'm going to see where the holes are left, and that's going to help me shape my dart. So I'm just going to draw right over my hole punches, and I'll actually draw it so then you'll be able to clearly see it because it's really hard to see right now. Again, my line, you really can't tell that much of a difference, but here is my new line. So here's my waistline. It goes up just a little bit at the 3, and then it goes back down again. The original line is this line that's underneath. The flatter and more even it starts off with where your dart is, the less of a shape that you're going to have to make. So I actually made another example for one that's a lot more dramatic, just so it's a little bit easier. You can see the original mark is the dark mark. So it's a pretty curvy line here, and then here's my dart. I do the same thing where I fold it, I'm folding it in half and pressing it towards the center. And you can definitely see a difference. Here's the line going this way, and then here's my other line going this way. With my other pin, I just draw a smooth line to connect them. I take a straight pin or I take my tracing wheel, and I'm just basically rolling it on the folded side of the paper because I'm trying to punch holes through to the other side. I open it up, I can see my holes and I draw my line. So that's shaping the top of the dart. So now the new waistline is going to go up and go down and continue on. But if I was to create this dart, if this was part of my waistline, when I actually sewed my dart together, I would end up with one smooth line instead of the original where it would go down here and then you'd have fabric sticking up here. So that's why you shape your darts. And here you have the first part of your block. So I went ahead and did solid lines so you can kind of see what the outline looks like. We have the waistline, the shaped darts going down the center front, across the hemline, and the side seam and hip curve area here. Go ahead and label everything. It's the basic skirt front, cut 1 on the fold. This is going to be the side that's placed on the fold, and you can see I have my little bracket with the arrows, and I say place on fold. So then when I cut it out, I end up with a piece that's twice as big. You're going to use woven fabric for this block, and it's not a pattern, this is just a block, so there's no seam allowance and hem allowance and everything. That's what our tracing paper is going to be for, and we'll deal with that after we finish our back. I went ahead and also did notches. You can do your notches however you want. I make sure I do one here at the hip line and side seam area, and I also do one at the center front area as well. The front block is done, and now we're going to move on to the back block. The first thing we're going to do is, it's very simple, is we're going to continue on the hemline and the hip line. So I'm going to just draw those lines straight. I like this part because there's no math and it's very easy to do. So we'll do hemline first. There we go. So I'll just write hemline over here for the back. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my hip line. All right, so I'll start this. So hip line, hem line. Over to this side, I'm going to go ahead and draw my center back line. And you just want to make sure that you're not starting this line too close because we're going to be starting here and working our way this way. If you start over here, you may run into the front, which we don't want to do. So start way over here and give yourself plenty of room. This line is going to be the same length as this line over here. So it's whatever your skirt length is. Mine is 14 inches. So I'm going to pick a point over here from the hemline and I'm going to draw up 14 inches. I have my center back line drawn, so I put CB for center back. Now we need to figure out how long our hip line has to be, and I'm going to go back to my measurements, but this time I'm going to be using the back measurement. So back hips, you're going to take your measurement. I'll just use mine as an example. 19 3/4. Now, of course, the back of your hips are usually bigger than the front because usually we have a little bit more in the back. You're going to add, again, 1 inch ease, 20 3/4 for me, and then I'm going to divide that in half. So that's going to give me 10 3/8 inches. So that's how long the the hip line needs to be. I'm going to measure from here, measure 10 3/8, and I'm going to make a mark. And I already made my mark ahead of time, so it's not like I'm eyeballing it, but I actually had a mark there. I'm going to do the same thing on the hemline. Measure the 10 3/8, put another mark. Then go ahead, grab your ruler so you can draw the side seam. I'm going to make sure both these line up. And I'm going to draw a line. Again, that's a skirt length, which is 14 inches, so it's the same length as this one over here. Just like you did with the front, you're going to draw a dashed line connecting the top of the center back with the side seam. Next, we're going to plot the hip curve. Just like we did before, from the hip line, you're going to go up the side seam 2 inches, make a mark. Up here at the top, you're going to go up 3/8 of an inch, draw a line, and then you're going to go in 3/4 and you're going to draw another line. And we're going to see where those points intersect, because now from that point, we're going to draw a curve to the 2 inch mark down here. So let me grab my hip curve. Now I marked 16 when I did it on my front, because we need to do the exact same point on this one as well. So the curves are exactly the same. So I have tape, it goes around the side and then comes out on the other side. So even though this is a different number, it's the same spot. So I'm going to line everything up. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to go ahead and draw the hip curve. Let's plot the waistline curve. So what we're going to do first is we're going to start over in this area. I'm going to grab my sewing gauge. Now this time you're going to go down from this dotted waistline 1/4 of an inch, draw a line, and then you're going to go in 1 inch, draw a line, and again we're going to have these points intersect. I'm going to grab my hip curve again, and again I'm using the inside curve. And I'm going to connect this point up here with this point continuing on to the center back. You want to make sure that you end on a straight edge. So you want it to be pretty straight, and then it's just going to slightly curve up. And I'm going to draw it with my marker. Now we're going to compare our actual back waist with our line so we can figure out how many darts or how much measurement we need to put into our darts so we can cinch down the top of the waistline. So we're going to look at our back waist measurement, and you're going to take this measurement. We're going to go ahead and add our ease, which is the same as the front, which was 3/4 of an inch. It's going to give me 14 3/4. Divide that in half, and that's going to give me 7 3/8. I'm going to compare this with this actual measurement, and I've already measured it. So this measurement is 9 3/8. I'm going to take the difference, which is pretty easy, so it's 2 inches. So instead of doing one big dart at 2 inches, I'm going to do 2 smaller darts. I'm going to divide this number in half. And that means I'm going to have 2 darts at 1 inch each. From the center back line along your waistline, you're going to start plotting your darts. So the first one, from here, you're going to measure 2 3/4. So this is going to be 1. Then you're going to do the length of your dart. So mine was 1 inch. So these darts are going to be a little bit bigger than my front. So there's 1 dart. There's going to be 1 1/4 inches between them. Here's the start of my next dart. This one is also 1 inch. So 1 dart, 2 dart. 1 inch plus 1 inch means that I'm having a dart that's a total of 2 inches, which is exactly what I need to whittle down the waistline in order to fit. In the middle of each of our darts, you're going to draw a line that's 5.5 inches in length. So this is also different than the front. Also, you're starting at this dash line, not at the bottom. So from the dash line going down 5.5 inches, make sure that your line is going parallel with the center back line. Once you have these lines and it's squared at the bottom, go ahead and connect the 2 sides to the middle, just like we've done before. And then don't forget to shape the top of your darts. Basically, our back block is done. So you can see I went ahead and put in all the information, my favorite part. I have basic skirt back, cut 2 because I want to put a zipper in the center back area. And again, we're using woven fabric. I added a grain line. So this is the direction it should lie on the fabric. And then I went ahead and put in my notches. So I have a notch at the hip line area at the side seam, just like I did with the front. Then I have the notch at the center back area. And then you'll see 2 notches here. This is to mark the end of my zipper. So this would be where the zipper placement is for if I plan on doing a 7-inch zipper. So I measured down here 7 inches and did it. If you want to do a longer zipper, then just do it a little further down. One of the last things we need to do with our blocks in order to give it the stamp of approval, we need to true the seams. And what this means is any seams between these two pattern pieces that are being sewn together, we need to test those seams and make sure that they're exactly the same and they're going to match. So I'm going to show you my little trick on doing that. The only seams that are being sewn between these two are the side seams. So I only need to match up this side seam here. We need to make sure the curve is the same, the notch is in the same place, the length of the seam is the same. I grab a piece of my tracing paper, or you can use tissue paper. I place it over the area that I need to match up. So in this case, my side seam. And I use a pencil, or a pen in my case, and I draw that seam. You can see I drew a little bit of the hemline and a little bit of the top waistline. If there's any notches, you mark that as well. So this is exactly what it is for my front. Now I'm going to compare it with the same area of the back. So I'm going to flip this over so it's the same, and I'm going to line everything up. And then I'm going to say, is the curve exactly the same? There's my original curve. If I put it together, everything lines up perfectly. The top matches, the bottom matches, and even my notch is in the same spot. So with that, I can say, yes, this is good, and now I can test it. The block pieces we just created aren't actual pattern pieces. Now you can create pattern pieces from them, which is a good idea, or you can hold on to them and save them as foundation pieces. So this block can be turned into other styles of skirts, which might be more appealing to you. Instead of going ahead and doing all the work again, we can just make minor tweaks and changes to this in order to create a different style. Now, even if you don't plan on wearing a basic skirt, it's still a good idea to create a muslin. That means you're doing a test with your pattern pieces. So you're making a pattern from your blocks, and then you're going to use cheap fabric. Just use muslin if you have it. You're going to baste your pieces together and just get it together enough so then you're able to try it on and make sure that everything is going to fit. If you need to make tweaks, you do tweaks to your block. To make pattern pieces, you're going to lay tracing paper over it. You need to decide how much seam allowance you want to add. Normally I do a 1/2 inch, but it's really up to you. So I usually use my sewing gauge, and I just go around the areas that need seam allowance, and then I make a little mark from the main line of my block. So I go here, make a mark, here, make a mark, and then I eventually connect those marks. Now if you have straight areas like here and here, go ahead and use your ruler, mark where the 1/2 inch, and then draw a line. Just make sure that if it's a curve going into a straight line, you kind of blend it so it's nice and smooth. So for my back, I would add my 1/2 inch seam allowance here, here, and here. Hem allowance, you can also decide how much you want to add. Normally I do 1 1/4 inch, so down here you're adding even more. This one I still need to do. This one is already done, so this is my front. You can see I already added it up here, my 1/2 inch seam allowance. I made sure my darts went up to the top. If I have any notches, I go ahead and put those on the edge of the seam allowance side. 1/2 inch is added here. I have my 1 1/4 inch down here. Now you'll notice I didn't add anything here on my center front line. That's because it's placed on a fold. You only add seam allowance where there's going to be a seam. There's no seam here, because we're not sewing two front pieces together. Instead, we're going to have one big front piece. Any information that you need, put it on your pattern piece. I also like to include notes to myself in case I put this away for a while. 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then 1 1/4 inch hem allowance. Cut this out, make your muslin, and see if your pattern works. Now I'm going to show you how to make a really easy waistband. So this is just going to be a classic waistband that you could put at the top of your skirt. The finished size of this waistband is 1.5 inches. So the first thing we need to figure out is how wide do we need to make our pattern piece. Now I have my pattern piece pretty long and I just folded it in half, so we're going to be working on this fold line over here and working our way this way. So finished size is 1.5. The waistband is going to be folded in half, so I need to take 1.5, multiply it by 2, plus add 1 inch for seam allowance. So it's going to be 4 inches in width. I'm just going to quickly pencil in. There's my first mark, and then I go 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's going to be the width of my waistband. Now I need to figure out how long I need to make the waistband. So we're going to go back to our math. I know you've had enough math by now, but this is the last time. So we have our waist for front and waist for back for the waistband is covering the whole circumference, so we're going to add those two together. So 15 plus 14 is 29, plus I'm going to add my ease that I included in when I created my waistline. So total ease was 1.5 inches, plus I'm going to add another 1.5 inches for an overlap, because the waistband isn't just going to meet like this. We want one side to overlap with the other, so then we can do a button or a hook and eye closure. Then I'm going to add another inch for seam allowance. So there's going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance on both sides. I'm going to add all this together, and that gives me a grand total of 33 inches. Now, because I have a fold here, I actually only need to draw half my waistband. So I'm going to take this, divide it in half, 16.5 inches. The top part here, I'm going to go ahead, draw a straight line, 16.5 inches. I'm going to go down 4 inches and draw another line, 16.5. And once you have your two lines, go ahead and draw a line at the end to connect them. I went ahead and cut my waistband pattern out. So at one end, I'm going to go ahead and add a notch. And I'm going to go in from the end a 1/2 inch because that's what my seam allowance is. Then I'm going to go to the other end and go in 2 inches because we have our 1/2 inch seam allowance plus we have 1.5 inches overlap. So I'm going to do another notch. And at this line, just go ahead and draw a straight line going up, sort of to indicate where the overlap is going to be. We're going to add one last notch. Now this is going to be in the middle of our waistband between this line here. So we're not including the overlap and we're not including the seam allowance on the other side as well. To find that out, we're just going to do a little bit of quick math. You're going to take your waist circumference plus the 1.5 inches of ease that we added into the total waistline area. For me, that comes to 30.5 inches. I'm going to divide that in half. It's 15.25. So just on one end, I'm just going to choose this end. I'm going to start, again, I'm not including this area, so I'm going to start at my line here. Measure 15.25, and then I'm going to draw another notch. Also at this time, what you can do is just go ahead and mark your pattern piece. So it's waistband, and you're going to cut one out of fabric, whatever you want your main fabric to be, and then cut one out of interfacing, because you always want to have some sort of interfacing in your waistband. If you want to add a buttonhole mark to your pattern piece, you can always do that. If you just want to do hooks and eyes, you can just skip this part. What I like to do is take my pattern piece, fold it in half. I mark where my seam allowance is. So 1/2 inch here, I make note 1/2 inch here. I take what's left, I divide it in half, which is about the 3/4 mark, and I go ahead and draw my buttonhole pretty close to my overlap line. Now the length really depends on the size of your button, but I would just go ahead and rough something in so you have something to go by when you're doing your muslin. So now you have all the basic pieces you need in order to create your basic skirt. If you need help, definitely check out our tutorial on the basic skirt assembly. Our book, Professor Pincushion's Beginner Guide to Sewing, Garment Making for Nervous Newbies, is now available to order. Go to professorpincushion.com/books or click on the link in the description to see a list of vendors where you can purchase it.